Hello and welcome. I'm Lee Camp, joined by Eleanor Goldfield. Welcome to the show. We're going to get into updates about Israel, Gaza, and on that note, why don't we start off with this scroll that Al Jazeera has put out of the victims of Israel's genocide in Gaza, the Israel Special Genocide Operation. Sorry, I want to use the correct terminology there. Want to be very polite to the IDF. Their Special Genocide Operation. The names you're seeing are every child that's been murdered by Israel. They're starting off in age, they're going by age. So all of these that you see on the screen, and for those of you listening to the podcast, this is thousands of names. But those of you looking at the screen, it's these are all 0 years old, and it slowly, eventually, gets to 1 year old and 2 year old. The 0 year olds take 30 seconds or something. Now we're into 1 year olds. It is just crazy the amount of people, the amount of children, especially that have been murdered by Israel over the past 4 months. Totally horrific. And I think everybody maybe should check out and repost this demonstration by Al Jazeera of just how many children we're talking about here. It really is egregious. And on that note, and by the way, later in the show, we're going to get into the way slave labor is used to produce your is it clothing or food? Food in the United States. And also the $1.5 trillion pretty secretive nuclear weapon program that the U.S. is involved in. All of that is coming up in just a few minutes. Please click thumbs up and share and all that good stuff. But I wanted to show you what happened to Samantha Power. Now, Samantha Power, and this is on that same topic of Israel's Special Genocide Operation. Samantha Power is head of USAID. USAID is a CIA cutout, but that doesn't mean where that pretends to give aid to other countries, or does give aid, but they do it in order to facilitate their own coups and things like that. But so she runs that now. She's the head of that. And she started in the Obama administration. But before that, she was well known for a book and giving lectures about the responsibility to protect against genocide. And that, the book was a huge bestseller and everything. And
She
so
was born in Ireland.
And I didn't know that. And so all of these things are about her, and her whole career is staked on our job as Americans to prevent genocide. That's what she does. That's who she is. But of course, it's become very prevalent and very clear in the past several years that she only means when it benefits U.S. power. That's when we need to protect against genocide. Other times, not a big deal. And so apparently, and this is from the Washington Post. This is no left wing rag here. Samantha Power, head of USAID, world-renowned scholar on genocide, was pointedly challenged by current and former USAID employees who, during a public event Tuesday, questioned her stance on the war in Gaza and complicity in the divisive U.S. policy. The person, the employee, said, "You wrote a book on genocide and you're still working for the administration. You should resign and speak out," said a former global health specialist who left her job at USAID last week. In her response at the event, Power did not address genocide accusations, but offered an implicit defense of Israel's military campaign, saying it's very important that what happened on October 7th never happen again. Because, that it's fine to do genocide as long as some of your people were killed at the beginning of it. When Hamas leadership is at large, those same kinds of attacks, kind of hostage taking, that same kind of sexual assault, that can happen again. Of course, the sexual assault has been debunked. I'm not saying no evidence could ever be brought forth, but so far there isn't any. She also came under criticism for not publicly disclosing the killing of a USAID contractor who died after a suspected Israeli strike in Gaza. So she's literally covering up the murder of her own employees by Israel. She said there's not a single call that President Biden makes or engagement that anybody in the Biden administration does that doesn't put the importance of civilian protection and international humanitarian law at the top of the conversation.
That's absolutely hilarious.
I mean, I don't know. We cannot overstate how much this woman has made her career on this idea of the U.S. responsibility to stop genocide. Like, she is a blinking banner of like, U.S. has a responsibility to stop genocide. However, it just so happens that our responsibility to stop genocide only applies when the U.S. can benefit from, let's say, a proxy war in Ukraine, or from some other, getting involved in some African country in order to take control of that country with a puppet government. It does not apparently apply when we are actually backing the genocide, perpetrating the genocide, funding the genocide, sending tens of thousands of bombs to Israel to drop on children. In those circumstances, no responsibility to protect. So yeah, another stellar liberal working at the Biden administration. All right, shall we move on to the main topic that I've listed here, which is the $1.5 trillion secretive nuclear weapons. I didn't
realize you made that the main
program.
Topic,
yeah,
considering it's gonna take like 2 minutes to talk about.
That's not true. I will make it take longer. You watch.
Well, because the article itself is from December of last year, December 2023. And I actually found it because I was doing research for an interview that y'all can listen to up on Project Censored with Leona Morgan, who's a Diné anti-nuclear agitator. And I was talking to her about the proposed mine, the uranium mine in the Grand Canyon. I'm not kidding. So I was doing some research about this and found this article from Scientific American. And just a quick note about Scientific American, they have a tendency to uplift and celebrate the military-industrial complex in a way that is creepy and sycophantic. So I'm not saying like, oh, what a great outlet. I'm saying that they happened to report on this when I couldn't really find much about this program in your typical news media. So they're, of course, taking like a scientific perspective. And a lot of the article is this journalist traveling through places where the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile System is housed in hundreds, 450 underground silos in Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado, and Nebraska. When you cough that way, so you're not coughing into the microphone. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Come on, it's Mike 101. So basically, a lot of the article is her, going to these, not that she can like go in and like look around and tap nuclear warheads, but she goes and talks to the people who live here and tries to figure out the economic arrangements
who live near nuclear weapons and see how they feel about it.
Well, and also what she doesn't bring up in the article, which again, we can talk about journalistic integrity and things like that. But one of the things that she doesn't talk about is that these, she does talk about the Trinity test and the downwinders and things like that. But currently there are some 15,000 your open pit uranium mines that have not been remediated or cleaned up. And they're still poisoning people. If you look at the levels of cancer and if you look at like respiratory illnesses, all kinds of things like that in shocking, predominantly indigenous reservations, whether that's Diné or Navajo or Hopi or things like that, Havasupai, the cancer rates and things like that are astronomical compared to the population that doesn't live around a bunch of unremediated uranium mines.
Yeah.
So, but basically the point of this is that we don't oftentimes think about the nuclear, like the nuclear weapon push still happening. That's like a Cold War thing, right? But as it happens, super exciting. The Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center requested the design and construction of a new missile because they felt that it was important to update the quote unquote this part of the triad, which is the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile System. Now, the triad means weapon systems that are deployable by land, sea, and air. Now, the sea and air ones can obviously move, but the land ones are on land, so they're stuck in these areas in Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado, and Nebraska. And so the Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center wanted an update because they felt that it wasn't up to snuff.
And can I just add in here that back when we did have these non-proliferation treaties, that a bunch of which Russia and the U.S. have now pulled out of, there was you basically we had agreed you won't make new nuclear weapons, but the Obama administration and going forward had decided, well, we can kind of get around that by modernizing the ones we have. So basically, you take the nuclear weapon out and you modernize the whole systems. So you're kind of creating new nuclear weapons. So they were finding ways around the non-proliferation treaties. And now, of course, they're just like shredding the treaties. But
yeah. So basically, the contractor Northrop Grumman, I'm sure you've heard about
good guys,
heard about them on the show. Bid on this.
They sell
new
special
missile.
kind of soap to get blood off your hands. It works wonders.
And by 2021, Congress had authorized the first investments in an updated nationwide intercontinental ballistic missile system, which is now called Sentinel. The $100 billion that will go to Sentinel represents only the first step of what is anticipated to be a $1.5 trillion investment in the triad, all of which is predicated on ramping up production of new plutonium pits, the deadly metallic hearts of nuclear warheads. So again, in that sentence, which is a little too congratulatory, I don't know. It just
the whole article's a little
I know.
celebratory of our nuclear systems, even while saying they need work.
But in that one sentence, the journalist makes clear that this is $1.5 trillion going to upgrade or update or whatever these systems. And that will also have to go hand in hand with more radioactive core to create these bombs. And so this is then inextricably tied to the new push for mines, predominantly either in Navajo, the reservation, despite the fact that they have laws against it. But what are Navajo laws compared to federal ones?
Right.
Or right next to. So like the Grand Canyon butts up against the western border of what is officially Navajo Nation. Of course, it's all still in land, but that's
that's another conversation.
That's another conversation. And so they're finding loopholes, and there was you can listen to the interview that I did with Leona Morgan from Hall No about this issue, but basically the whole thing is filled with loopholes. Biden signed a national monument that would have supposedly protected places like the Grand Canyon, basically set up a moratorium on uranium mining and destruction of this kind, but these mines were grandfathered in. So there's nothing that Biden could have done about it, right? Like, oh, but the Democrats get to celebrate that they created this new moratorium on new mines without mentioning like that really important part that all of these mines, like 10 or so that could pull up millions of tons of radioactive shit out of the earth, they neglected to mention that those can still go ahead. And there is evidence to suggest that they are going ahead.
And like a year ago, I did a video on what happens to uranium mines that are shut down. They're basically, they've been tapped out and the companies are moving on or whatever. And there's a whole system of what's supposed to happen with them that the EPA is supposed to oversee. But the research in the article had looked into what actually happened to these, many uranium pits and mines that the EPA had overseen the closure of. And it was like many of them were like not yet completed. And for some reason, 10 and 20 years after they've stopped actually producing anything there, they just haven't yet completed them. And the EPA gave a pass to a bunch of them as well. So it was like, 10% or 20% of mines that are so-called closed actually go through all of the process and actually get to a place where they're no longer radioactive, no longer giving cancer to the people around them and everything else. It's horrible for Americans, but then of course you have the fact that if we keep creating more and more advanced nuclear weapons, we're pushing all of humanity towards nuclear obliteration.
Unless we forget we're the only country that has ever used a nuclear weapon. So
And we've accidentally dropped and lost many
That's true.
as well.
You can hear more about that on
Government Secrets. I have another podcast called Government Secrets.
Is it
I
weird that
like the
I'm
I like
promoting-
the but I like the
Do you like the
lipstick on
lipstick?
the top.
Yeah.
I have another podcast called Government Secrets where we have done many episodes on lost or dropped nukes. Some of them dropped on
I want to post a comment.
go for it. Some of them dropped on North Carolina in one event.
I read about that, and I wouldn't be sitting here if that had actually gone off. So I'm putting in the comments here projectcensored.org. That's where you can find, you just go to projectcensored.org, click on radio show, and that's where you can find that interview that I did with Leona Morgan, who's a Diné anti-nuclear agitator, and she goes through the basically outlines this mine in the Grand Canyon. And yeah, and so I mean, Mazel Tov, my fellow Americans, on the $1.5 trillion nuclear program.
And let me
That's
just
super
read.
exciting.
Speaking of how they kind of, this is kind of a positive article about nuclear weapons.
It really is.
Not fully, but like there's a lot of questions raised, but it's way too positive. This is from a non-proliferation expert, although they give him this quote that is rather positive. I expect the coming decades are going to be a boom time for the nuclear weapons industry.
Mhm.
Very exciting. And the atomic scientists have put us at 90 seconds to midnight, and midnight is what they call in the industry a bad thing.
90 seconds? I thought it was even less.
That's 90 seconds,
Oh.
I believe. 90 seconds to midnight. And you're just seeing things spiral out of control. Also, there's been a lot of talk on media as well as in the Beltway circles of a like strategic nuclear strike.
Oh, totally.
Rather than, because up until recently, the talk was always, if you do use one nuclear bomb, you got to
That's
use
it.
all of them
Yeah.
because it's like game on. Whereas now they're talking about like it could be used like just very carefully.
Well, like especially Iran, there have been several people that have just outright said, I can't remember if it was like Lindsey Graham most recently that was just like, yeah, we should just nuke Iran. It's like, do you have any clue what the wow?
Yeah, the ramifications of that. And if people want a 10-minute long segment on how stupid all the propaganda we've gotten about Iran is, I did that on the last live stream on yesterday.
The other part of the other interview in the show with Leona Morgan is Alan McLeod, where I talked to him about his most recent article in Mint Press News about how we are desperately trying to go to war with Iran and thereby making everything Iran's fault.
Okay.
So
everybody check those out. We're going to move on now to the prisoners in the U.S. that are making your food. Because as we pretend that other countries are authoritarian and have slave labor and oppress their people, we still have slave labor. And
so
people should know that.
this was actually a piece done by AP, which I was kind of surprised.
It happens. Even a
It
blind
happens.
squirrel finds a nut sometimes.
Well, this is a hell of a nut. And we've talked about prison labor in the past too, like all kinds of labor, like Victoria's Secret is involved with prison labor and firefighters and things like that. So it's not like, oh my God, we're forcing prisoners to work as slaves. Like that's not the newsworthy part. The newsworthy part is that they did a deep dive specifically into the agricultural sector. And it's really just like history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Like this is a hell of a rhyme. Not only that people are so as they point out in this, for instance, some prisoners work on the same plantation soil where slaves harvested cotton, tobacco, and sugarcane more than 150 years ago, with some present-day images looking eerily similar to the past. In Louisiana, which has one of the country's highest incarceration rates, men working on the, quote, farm line still stoop over crops stretching far into the distance. And one of those prisons, Angola, is literally built on a former Southern slave plantation. So
Wow.
it's like,
Don't even want to change the signage, maybe?
Right. Like, really, this is like the kind of shit that you'd expect to read in some horrifically twisted script, but this is the script of the United States. And so again, this is specifically about the agriculture sector, and they outline, I mean, just on the face of it, how horrific this is, but also issues that, for instance, if they refuse to work, some can jeopardize their chances of parole.
Right. So it's not actually a free choice.
No.
People like to pretend. You'll hear this from people that, support the prison firefighters, the idea that they should get to work as well. Well, it's a free choice. If you are a prisoner in a oppressive system in the largest prison state in the world, and you decide to be a firefighter, a deadly activity, to just get a chance out of those prison bars, that's not a free choice. That is incredibly oppressive choice.
And then also, if you refuse, you could end up in solitary confinement, which is, as we pointed out many times, is torture. Now, these goods that the prisoners produce on farms across, but predominantly in the South, also a little echoing of history here. These goods wind up in the supply chains of a dizzying array of products found in most American kitchens, from Frosted Flakes cereal to ballpark hot dogs.
I've always thought Frosted Flakes tasted a little like slave labor, just a touch.
Gold medal flour, Coca-Cola, and Riceland rice. They're on the shelves of virtually every supermarket in the country, including Kroger, Target, Aldi, and Whole Foods. And some goods are exported, including to countries that have had products blocked from entering the U.S. for using forced or prison labor. Now that's, yeah.
Here are some of the brands listed here. Although a lot of these brands own a ton of brands. So when you see Coca-Cola on here, that also means like half of all water brands or whatever. Like there's a lot of,
So, the Tyson also owns like a shit ton of
Cargill actually owns 25% of the entire farm to plate process, like every aspect of it. So when you say Cargill, it means everything.
Like, they also outline how even if you get out to the field and if you pass out or if you refuse because it's just you throw down your tools or in protest. One man, Willie Ingram, talks about what happened when somebody would do that kind of action. They'd come maybe 4 in the truck, shields over their face, billy clubs, and they'd beat you right there in the field. Jesus. They'd beat you, handcuff you, and beat you again.
So it's free choice. Free choice.
So, like, I'm struggling to actually see the difference between this and slavery, particularly when you consider the fact, like, Willie Ingram, who's sharing this story, received a life sentence after pleading guilty to a crime he said he didn't commit. And he was told he'd served 10.5 years, but it wasn't until 2021 that a judge finally released him. So he spent 51 years in Angola when he was told that he would spend 10.
Jesus.
So that's a life sentence, just like, I don't know, slavery was a life sentence. So I'm really struggling to see the distinction between these two horrific, I don't know, what do you want to, these acts of U.S. empire. And this is when you consider the fact too that roughly 2 million people are locked up, and the U.S. because of this, the U.S. prison labor system has morphed into a multi-billion-dollar empire, extending far beyond the classic images of prisoners stamping license plates or battling wildfires. An analysis, now again, this is just agriculture, but prison labor has its hands in every industry, basically. Yep. An analysis of data amassed by the AP traced nearly $200 million worth of sales of farmed goods and livestock to businesses over the past 6 years, a conservative figure that does not include tens of millions more in sales to state and government entities. Much of the data was incomplete, and though it was clear that the biggest revenues came from sprawling operations in the South. And, wait for it, leasing out prisoners to companies. This is legit. Like, this is where slave patrols, i.e., modern day police, came from was plantations used to lease out slaves. Like literally, like this is the
And
same playbook. Like what?
this is how the South maintained their workforce after slavery was ended. Was they obviously, it continues to be in the Constitution that you can enslave people who are prisoners. So in the South, people, and you could say cops, but cops were any white guy with a gun could be called a cop. Would grab any black guy they saw that wasn't in a house or something, and just throw them in jail. And then those jails would lease out the prisoners to the plantations. So basically, they were able to maintain slavery in a lot of these plantations even after slavery was over by saying, oh, no, we use prisoners. And as you and I have discussed before, sometimes the treatment was even worse than being a slave, because if they killed the person or harmed them, injured them severely, they could just say, I need a new one.
Yeah. So the some advocates for this, who I wouldn't even deign to call human, say that well, it's not that big of a deal, because then they can use the skills that they get from being forced into slave labor. They can use that once they get out of jail. That's a ridiculous, hideous argument. Also, a lot of this is not what people would want to or even have access to doing, because it is specifically prison labor. So working in the fields of the penitentiary fields, that's prison labor. So let's say you get really good at harvesting turnips or whatever the hell. And then you go out into the world, but that's not a job that you can get because, that was actually just a prison job. Second thing, once you get out of jail, I don't know if people know this, but that shit's on your record. And so it's incredibly difficult to get a job. And this was one of the arguments that was made with regards to firefighters. You can't become a firefighter if you've been charged, I think it's like a felony. So then they've gotten all of this, real life experience at fighting fires, but, I'm sorry, you can't actually be a firefighter because you were in jail. So when you were helping to save us before and you were in jail, and now you can't do that now that you're out of jail. Sorry. So they're, damned on the inside and then damned on the outside once they get out. And on the other side, on the other, the other part of this is that these companies, not only do they have access to slave labor, but then on top of that, they oftentimes get tax credits and other financial incentives to use slave labor. And then, of course, it's not like they have to be accountable to the prisoners. It's like incarcerated workers have workman's comp. That's not a thing, right? They don't have to have basic protections or safe work environments. So this is a sweet deal for these companies on every single level in terms of the economics. And there's really no recourse for the prisoners.
Yeah. I mean, and in case people need reminding, we are the largest prison state in the world. We have the most number of prisoners, both by sheer number and per capita. And yet we point to other countries and say that they are a prison state or things like that. We are the largest prison state in the world. And it's used for multiple aspects. Some of it is to make money like this, but that's not the prime driver of the largest prison state and the reasons for it. It is to mainly stop people of color from becoming too powerful, exercising too many rights over democracy and other aspects of community. And a lot of the people locked up have to do with drug crimes, which the drug war, Ehrlichman, a former Nixon aide, actually admitted in the 1990s that the drug war was created in order to go after Nixon's two main rivals, which were the black community and the activist community. And it has continued. It's a war against our own people. And yet, to this day, Democrats and Republicans, remember, they're all one party, and they're all one party, and they support things like the U.S. being the largest prison state in the world.
So I just wanted to share a couple more points here. One woman who was interviewed by AP shared that I was in a field with a hoe in my hand with maybe 100 other women. We were standing in a line very closely together, and we had to raise our hose up at the exact same time and count 1, 2, 3, chop. And for those listening who, well, I guess it's not up on the screen anyway, but Faye Jacobs is Black. And she was released in 2018 after serving more than 26 years, and said the only pay she received was 2 rolls of toilet paper a week, toothpaste, and a few menstrual pads each month.
There she is
Yeah.
on the screen now.
So basically, and also to point out like how twisted this is, it's not like you get to choose what kind of work you're doing. So it says also a point that the AP makes is corrections officials exert power by deciding who deserves trade building jobs like welding and who works in the fields. So if they don't like you, they force you to, work out in the fields, like in Louisiana, where it's 1 billion degrees. And in the article, they also mentioned that people would pass out and they wouldn't get water. They'd just either start beating them or drag them or whatever. Versus like you could be, if you, for some reason this corrections official likes you, then you might get something that you could potentially use once you get out, like welding. But again, that is predicated on your ability to get a job because you were in jail. So as one person put it, Calvin Thomas, who spent more than 17 years at Angola, that's the Louisiana State Penitentiary, that's a former plantation, which is commonly referred to as Angola because of the ancestry of those who were previously enslaved there. He said, you can't call it anything else. It's just slavery. And again, the U.S. Constitution has enshrined slavery. A lot of people think that it's illegal, but this is so legal because the 13th Amendment states that slavery and involuntary servitude are banned except as punishment for a crime. So this is legit enshrined in the US Constitution. So anybody who tries to tell you that slavery is illegal, you'd be like, no, did you read till the end of the sentence of the 13th Amendment?
And the map I'm putting up on the screen now is prisons with agricultural programs. So as you can see, this is not a small number of prisons. This
is just agricultural.
This is dozens and dozens across the entire nation, and this is just agricultural programs, as you just said. Whereas, as we also mentioned, prisons have forms of labor, forms of slave labor, many other kinds, such as call centers. Sometimes you're on the phone talking to someone at a, airline call center or something, and you don't even know you're talking to a prisoner. They have people sewing garments. One of the craziest ones that I remember hearing about, although I don't know if this has changed since that time, but since a few years ago, but Victoria's Secret and other brands would get made in some other country by slave labor, someone getting paid 5 cents a garment or something, and they get made by slave labor, and then they get shipped to the United States, where the prisoners would just sew on the American flag saying "Made in America." So the "Made in America" part was only the tag, not the garment, but even the tag was sewn on by a prisoner. So "Made in America," yeah, hurrah!
Tags made in America.
And thank you for Team Orca there in the comment section for mentioning that if you dig down to the deeper level of this is how capitalism works. This is the market economy where everything is about profit. Basically, we, the United States imprisoned all these people, and of course, even from the moment after slavery, this was used for profit. It was used to continue slavery for profit for a tiny number of almost exclusively white individuals across this country. And then it has moved into other profit centers. But it all has to do with profit at the end of the day. And there's no thought for humanity really within this system. It is all about where can we get the most money. And of course, they milk money out of the prisoners in other ways, not just their labor, by ripping them off in terms of like phone calls and stuff. J-Pay was one of the systems that was making all kinds of crazy money. I think they continue to all kinds of crazy money from prisoners. If you try and make a phone call, it's, $1 or $5 a minute or something completely unreasonable.
Well, and just like that, everything costs money, and it costs an exorbitant amount of money, particularly when you consider that this is slave labor and many don't get paid at all. Or if they do, they get paid like $1 an hour or something. If that, so, you have to pay for, I read a story several years ago that I did a piece on that, like, particularly women in prison, they don't have access to menstrual pads and things like that, so they have to pay for those, and if they don't have the money for it, oh well, sucks for you. And things like toilet paper and toothpaste, like things that you would assume would be part of the deal if you're imprisoned and can't like actually pay for anything yourself, but no, you have to pay for that. So yeah, everything costs money and you're working as a slave. So
yeah. All right, we're moving on to other topics that we got coming up here, but all of the rest of this live stream is at rumble.com/Lee Camp. That's rumble.com/Lee Camp, as well as the locals page. You guys are all amazing. Thank you for being here. It's free to watch at Rumble, by the way. So for those of you watching and you're new to this show, free to watch at Rumble. And go when you get over there, please click the free follow tag. That's the green button, and then click the bell icon so you hear about my stuff and our stuff. But yeah, the rest of this live stream, which we're hoping to bring you, depending on the amount of time, but about story about surveillance capitalism, update on Julian Assange, and much more. So join us over there, free to watch, rumble.com/Lee Camp, as well as my locals page. You guys rock. Do you feel like they rock?
I do.
Okay, see? She knows more than me, so.
Don't know about that.
Which one next?
Let's do surveillance capitalism.
Cool.
Because I've